Tycoon executive abandoned his infertile wife. 5 years later, he spotted her with twins. Another early meeting? Sophia's voice was soft, tinged with a hint of disappointment she couldn't quite hide. Eduardo turned, his gaze softening as it fell upon his wife. Sophia stood there, a vision in her silk robe, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. For a moment, he felt a pang of guilt for the countless mornings he'd left her alone. "You know how it is, my love," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The Wilson account won't close itself." Sophia nodded, her fingers absently twirling the wedding band on her finger. "I thought maybe we could have breakfast together today. I made your favorite." "Rain check?" Eduardo cut in, already reaching for his briefcase. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. Dinner at Carluccio's tonight." A flicker of hope danced in Sophia's eyes. "Really? You mean it this time?" Eduardo paused at the door, struck by the raw emotion in her voice. He turned back, crossing the room in 3 quick strides to pull her into an embrace. "I mean it," he whispered into her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of jasmine. 8 o'clock sharp. I'll even turn off my phone." Sophia leaned into him, savoring the rare moment of closeness. "I'll believe it when I see it," she teased, but there was an undercurrent of longing in her words. As Eduardo pulled away, his hand lingered on Sophia's cheek. For a fleeting second, the mask of the ambitious executive slipped, revealing the man who had fallen head over heels for the aspiring artist with dreams as big as her heart. "I love you," he said, the words carrying more weight than usual. "I love you too," Sophia replied, her smile genuine but tinged with a sadness she couldn't quite explain. The door closed behind Eduardo, leaving Sophia alone in the vast penthouse. She walked to the window, watching as her husband's sleek car pulled out of the driveway. The city stretched out before her, a canvas of possibilities and promises. Yet as she stood there, surrounded by the trappings of success, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing from their picture-perfect life. Little did they know, this ordinary morning was the beginning of a journey that would test their love, challenge their values, and ultimately redefine the meaning of family and success. The stage was set for a story of heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected second chances. One evening, as they prepared for yet another high-profile charity gala, the tension in the air was palpable. Sophia stood before the mirror, adjusting her designer gown, her reflection a stark contrast to the turmoil within. "Darling, have you seen my cufflinks?" Eduardo called from the walk-in closet. Sophia's hands paused on her necklace. "The ones your mother gave you? There in the top drawer of your—" "Found them," Eduardo interrupted, emerging from the closet looking impeccable in his tuxedo. He stopped short, taking in the sight of his wife. "You look stunning." Sophia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you. I just hope I can keep up with all the small talk tonight." Eduardo approached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You'll be fine. Just remember to mention our plans for starting a family. It always gets them talking." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She turned to face her husband, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eduardo, we've been trying for over a year now. Don't you think we should—" "Not tonight, Sophia," Eduardo cut in, his tone sharp. "Tonight we play our parts. The successful power couple, remember?" Sophia swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "And what if that's not enough? What if I can't?" "You can, and you will," Eduardo insisted, his grip on her shoulders tightening slightly. "We have the best doctors, the most advanced treatments. It's just a matter of time." As they made their way to the gala, the city lights blurred through the tinted windows of their limousine. Sophia's hand found Eduardo's, seeking comfort, but his remained stiff, his mind already on the networking opportunities that awaited. At the event, they moved through the crowd with practiced ease, their smiles never faltering. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. "Eduardo, Sophia," a booming voice called out. They turned to see Richard Blackwood, a business associate, approaching with his wife and their newborn. "Congratulations on the little one," Eduardo said smoothly, shaking Richard's hand. Thank you," Richard beamed, Nothing quite like it, I tell you. So, when are you two planning to join the parent club? Sophia felt her heart race, her palms growing clammy. Eduardo's arm snaked around her waist, pulling her close. Oh, you know how it is, he replied with a practiced laugh. We're just waiting for the right moment. Career's been keeping us busy. As the conversation continued, Sophia felt herself drifting, the voices around her becoming a distant hum. The room seemed to close in, the expectations and judgments of society pressing down on her like a physical weight. Later that night, as they returned home in silence, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect life was built on shifting sands. She glanced at Eduardo, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights, and wondered if he felt it too. The growing distance between them, the unspoken fears that threatened to tear apart everything they had built. Little did they know, the true test of their love and the strength of their bond was just beginning. The facade of perfection was about to crumble, revealing the raw truth beneath and setting in motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever. A gentle knock on the door made them both jump. Dr. Reeves entered, her face a carefully crafted mask of professionalism. Sophia's heart sank. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of countless doctors over the past year. Mr. and Mrs. Alvarez, Dr. Reeves began, her voice soft but firm. I'm afraid I don't have good news. Eduardo stopped pacing, his hand finding Sophia's shoulder in a rare gesture of support. Sophia closed her eyes, bracing herself for the words she'd been dreading. The tests confirm what we suspected, Dr. Reeves continued. Sophia, you have primary ovarian insufficiency. It means I can't have children, Sophia interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded solemnly. Natural conception would be extremely unlikely. However, there are other options we can explore. Eduardo's grip on Sophia's shoulder tightened. What kind of options? He demanded, his business instincts kicking in, searching for solutions, for control. As Dr. Reeves outlined potential treatments and alternatives, Sophia felt herself drifting away from the conversation. The doctor's words became a distant hum, drowned out by the thundering of her own heartbeat. She glanced up at Eduardo, hoping to find comfort in his eyes, but saw only a storm of emotions: disappointment, frustration, and something that looked terrifyingly like resentment. The drive home was silent, the tension between them palpable. Sophia stared out the window, the city blurring past, feeling more alone than she ever had before. As they entered their penthouse, Eduardo finally broke the silence. We'll get a second opinion, he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Dr. Harrison in New York. I'll make the call tomorrow. Sophia turned to him, tears welling in her eyes. Eduardo, please, can we just talk about this? About how we feel? Eduardo loosened his tie with jerky movements. What's there to talk about? We have a problem and we'll fix it. That's what we do. But what if we can't fix it? Sophia's voice cracked. What if this is just who I am now? Eduardo's face hardened, a mask slipping into place. That's not an option, Sophia. We've always known we wanted a family. It's part of our plan. Plans change, Eduardo, Sophia pleaded, reaching for him. We could look into adoption? Or adoption? Eduardo scoffed, pulling away from her touch. And raise someone else's child as our own? As the heir to everything I've built. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Sophia felt something break inside her, a fissure forming in the foundation of their marriage. Is that all this is to you? She whispered. An heir? What about love, Eduardo? What about us? Eduardo's jaw clenched, his eyes avoiding hers. I need some air, he muttered, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. As it slammed shut behind him, Sophia sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs. The enormity of the diagnosis crashed over her in waves, along with the terrifying realization that it might cost her not just her dreams of motherhood, but the man she loved. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the heartbreak unfolding high above its streets. Sophia remained curled on the floor, surrounded by the trappings of their perfect life, feeling more lost and alone than ever before. Little did she know, this moment of despair was just the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, redefine her dreams, and ultimately lead her to an unexpected path of fulfillment and love. One evening, Sophia found Eduardo in his study, hunched over his laptop, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. She hesitated at the doorway, gathering her courage before speaking. "Eduardo." Her voice was soft, tentative. "Can we talk?" He didn't look up, his fingers continuing their relentless dance across the keyboard. "I'm busy, Sophia. Can it wait?" Sophia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "No, it can't. We've been avoiding this conversation for weeks now." Eduardo finally looked up, his eyes hard and distant. "What's there to talk about? We're exploring our options just like we discussed." "Are we?" Sophia challenged, stepping into the room. "Because it feels like you're making all the decisions without me. I found the brochures for the surrogacy agency. Were you even going to tell me?" A flicker of guilt crossed Eduardo's face before it was quickly replaced by determination. "I'm trying to find a solution, Sophia. Someone has to." "A solution?" Sophia's voice cracked. "Is that what I am now? Problem to be solved?" Eduardo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "What do you want from me, Sophia? To just give up? To accept that we'll never have the family we planned?" "I want you to see me," Sophia cried, tears streaming down her face. "To acknowledge that I'm hurting too. That this isn't just about your legacy or your plans for the future. It's about us, Eduardo. Our love. Our partnership." For a moment, Eduardo's facade cracked, revealing the pain and fear beneath. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated expression that Sophia had seen him use in tough business negotiations. "Love doesn't build empires, Sophia," he said, his voice low and controlled. "It doesn't secure futures or create legacies. We had a plan, and I intend to see it through, with or without your cooperation." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She stumbled back, gripping the doorframe for support. "What are you saying?" Eduardo turned back to his computer, his posture rigid. "I'm saying that if you can't give me an heir, if you won't consider the options I've presented, then perhaps we need to reevaluate our situation." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sophia felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. "You would leave me? Over this?" Eduardo's silence was answer enough. Sophia's world shattered around her, the pieces of her once perfect life falling away to reveal the harsh truth beneath. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice thick with tears and disbelief. As she turned to leave, Eduardo called out, a hint of desperation in his voice. "Sophia, wait," but she was already gone, fleeing from the study, from the penthouse, from the life that suddenly felt like a beautiful lie. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Sophia leaned against the mirrored wall, her reflection a stranger to her own eyes. Out on the bustling city streets, Sophia wandered aimlessly, the cool night air a stark contrast to the fire of emotions raging within her. She found herself in a small park, collapsing onto a bench as the weight of her new reality crashed over her. As she sat there, surrounded by the indifferent hum of the city, Sophia made a silent vow to herself. She would not let Eduardo's obsession with legacy define her worth. She would find a way to rebuild, to rediscover the woman she was beneath the label of infertile wife. Little did Sophia know, this moment of heartbreak and resolve was the first step on a journey that would lead her to unexpected joy, profound self-discovery, and a love more powerful than she could have ever imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, Sophia felt a flicker of hope ignite within her heart. "Mrs. Alvarez?" A nurse called, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Sophia stood, her legs shaky. Eduardo followed, his hand on the small of her back, a gesture that once brought comfort but now felt like an obligation. As they entered the doctor's office, Dr. Patel greeted them with a sympathetic smile. "Eduardo, Sophia, please have a seat. I have the results of your latest round of IVF." Sophia's heart raced as she lowered herself into the chair. She glanced at Eduardo, but his face was an impenetrable mask. Dr. Patel took a deep breath. I'm afraid the embryo transfer was unsuccessful. The pregnancy test came back negative. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sophia felt tears welling up, but she blinked them back, determined not to break down. Eduardo leaned forward, his voice tight. What are our options now, doctor? Surely there's something else we can try. Dr. Patel's expression softened. We can attempt another round, but I must be honest with you. Given Sophia's condition and the results we've seen so far, the chances of success are very low. Sophia felt Eduardo stiffen beside her. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing abruptly. This can't be it, he said, pacing the small office. There must be experimental treatments, cutting-edge procedures. Money is no object. Dr. Patel shook her head. Mr. Alvarez, I understand your frustration, but no, you don't understand, Eduardo snapped. Do you know what's at stake here? The legacy we're trying to build. Sophia flinched at his words, each one a dagger to her heart. She stood, her voice barely above a whisper. Eduardo, please. He turned to her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and desperation. Don't you want this, Sophia? Don't you want to fight for our family? The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken accusations. Sophia took a shaky breath, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Of course I want a family, she said, her voice growing stronger. But at what cost, Eduardo? Look at what this is doing to us, to our marriage. Maybe it's time we consider other options. Eduardo's face hardened. Other options? Like what? Adoption? Surrogacy? I told you, Sophia, I need an heir, Sophia finished, the words bitter on her tongue. Not a child to love, but an heir to your empire. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Patel cleared her throat, uncomfortable. Perhaps I should give you two a moment. No need, Eduardo said, his voice cold. We're done here. He stormed out of the office, leaving Sophia standing there, shattered but somehow still standing. She turned to Dr. Patel, mustering a weak smile. Thank you for everything, doctor, she said softly. I think this might be our last appointment. As Sophia left the clinic, she found Eduardo waiting by the car, his back to her. She approached cautiously, feeling as if she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Eduardo, she began, reaching for him. He turned, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger she saw there, or even disappointment. It was indifference. I have a late meeting, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Take the car home. We'll talk later. As he walked away, hailing a taxi, Sophia felt something inside her crumble. She slid into the back of their luxury car, the leather seats suddenly feeling cold and unfamiliar. Where to, Mrs. Alvarez? The driver asked. Sophia hesitated, realizing she couldn't bear the thought of returning to their empty penthouse. Just drive, she said softly. Anywhere but home. As the car pulled away from the curb, Sophia gazed out the window at the city rushing by. She felt adrift, lost in a sea of uncertainty. But beneath the pain and fear, a small spark of resilience flickered to life. This wasn't the end of her story, Sophia realized. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one she would have to write for herself. As the car wound its way through the city streets, Sophia made a silent promise to herself. She would find a way to heal, to rediscover her own worth beyond her ability to bear a child. Little did she know, this moment of quiet resolve was setting her on a path that would lead to unexpected joy, profound self-discovery, and a love more powerful than anything she had ever known. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope for what the future might hold. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything changed. Sophia awoke to find Eduardo's side of the bed cold and empty, not an unusual occurrence these days. But as she made her way to the kitchen, she noticed something different. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken finality. She found Eduardo in his study, surrounded by packed boxes. Her heart plummeted to her stomach. Eduardo. Her voice was barely a whisper. What's going on? He looked up, his eyes hollow and distant. I think we both know this isn't working anymore, Sophia. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sophia gripped the doorframe for support. What are you saying? Eduardo stood, his movements mechanical. I've made arrangements. The penthouse will be yours. My lawyers will be in touch about the rest. The rest? Sophia echoed, disbelief coloring her voice. Eduardo, you can't just... We're married. We made vows. Vows based on a future that can no longer exist, he replied, his tone flat and businesslike. I need an heir, Sophia. Family. You can't give me that. The words hit her like physical blows. Sophia stumbled forward, reaching for him. Please, Eduardo. We can work through this. We can look into adoption, or... It's not enough. Eduardo snapped, his composure finally cracking. Don't you understand? I've built an empire. I need someone to carry on my legacy, my bloodline. Tears streamed down Sophia's face. So that's it? Everything we've been through, everything we've shared. It means nothing because I can't give you a biological child. For a moment, something like regret flashed in Eduardo's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold determination. I'm sorry, Sophia, but this is the way it has to be. He brushed past her, grabbing his suitcase. Sophia followed him to the foyer, her mind reeling, grasping for something, anything to make him stay. Eduardo, please, she begged. Don't do this. I love you. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. For a heartbeat, Sophia thought he might turn back, might realize the magnitude of what he was throwing away. But then he straightened his shoulders and opened the door. Goodbye, Sophia, he said, not looking back. I truly hope you find happiness. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the sound echoing in the suddenly cavernous penthouse. Sophia stood there, frozen, as the reality of what had just happened washed over her in waves. She sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs. The life she had known, the future she had planned, it all crumbled around her like a house of cards. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Sophia remained curled on the floor, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer existed. When she finally found the strength to stand, she moved like a sleepwalker through the penthouse, touching familiar objects that now felt alien. She paused in front of a large mirror in the hallway, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled. But beneath the grief and shock, there was something else, a spark of defiance, of resilience. You will not break me, she whispered to her reflection, her voice hoarse but gaining strength. This is not the end of my story. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the penthouse, Sophia made a decision. She couldn't stay here, surrounded by memories and ghosts of what might have been. With shaking hands, she began to pack a bag, not knowing where she would go, only that she needed to leave. As she stepped into the elevator, taking one last look at the place she had called home, Sophia felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The future stretched out before her, unknown and daunting, but also full of possibilities she had never considered. Little did she know, as the elevator doors closed on her old life, that this moment of heartbreak and courage was the first step on a journey that would lead her to unexpected joy, profound self-discovery, and a love more powerful than anything she had ever known. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, Sophia felt truly alive, ready to write the next chapter of her story on her own terms. One particularly gloomy afternoon, Sophia found herself in front of a small art gallery. The vibrant colors of the paintings in the window seemed to mock her gray existence. Without thinking, she pushed open the door, the soft chime of a bell announcing her entrance. Welcome, a warm voice greeted her. I'm Claire, the owner. Feel free to look around. Sophia nodded mutely, her eyes drawn to a striking abstract piece. Bold strokes of red and gold seemed to dance across the canvas, conveying a sense of passion and rebirth. Beautiful, isn't it? Claire said, coming to stand beside her. The artist calls it Phoenix Rising. Sophia felt something stir within her, a faint echo of the passion she once felt for her own art. "It's alive," she whispered. Claire studied Sophia's face, noting the shadows under her eyes and the slump of her shoulders. "Are you an artist yourself?" The question caught Sophia off guard. I used to be. Before what?" Claire prompted gently. Suddenly, the dam broke. Words poured out of Sophia, a torrent of pain and loss. She told Claire everything: the infertility, Eduardo's abandonment, the crushing weight of failure she'd been carrying. As she spoke, Sophia felt a strange lightness begin to spread through her chest. It was as if each word released was a burden lifted. Claire listened without judgment, her eyes full of compassion. When Sophia finally fell silent, Claire took her hand. "My dear," she said softly, "you've been through so much. But let me tell you something. Your worth is not defined by your ability to bear children or by a man who couldn't see your true value." Sophia felt tears welling up again, but these were different, cleansing, cathartic. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted. Claire's grip on her hand tightened. "Then it's time to find out. Tell me, when was the last time you picked up a paintbrush?" Sophia blinked, surprised by the question. "Years. Not since Eduardo and I got married. He always said it was just a hobby." "Well," Claire said, a glint in her eye, "I think it's high time you rekindled that hobby. I have a small studio space in the back. Why don't you come by tomorrow? No pressure, just see what happens." For the first time in months, Sophia felt a flicker of excitement. I'd like that. Thank you, Claire." As Sophia left the gallery, the world seemed a little brighter. She found a small, affordable apartment nearby and spent the night surrounded by blank walls that suddenly felt full of possibility. The next day, Sophia stood in front of a blank canvas in Claire's studio, paintbrush in hand. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Just let it flow," Claire encouraged from the doorway. "Paint what you feel." Sophia took a deep breath and touched brush to canvas. At first, her strokes were hesitant, unsure. But as the minutes ticked by, something awakened within her. Colors blended and swirled, emotions pouring out through her hands. Hours passed in what felt like moments. When Sophia finally stepped back, she gasped. The painting before her was raw, chaotic, beautiful. It was a visual representation of her journey. The pain, the loss, but also the first tendrils of hope and rebirth. "Sophia," Claire breathed, "this is extraordinary." Tears streamed down Sophia's face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of release, of catharsis. "I'd forgotten," she whispered. "I'd forgotten who I was." As she stood there, surrounded by the scent of paint and possibility, Sophia felt something shift inside her. The crushing weight of the past few months began to lift, replaced by a tentative hope for the future. Little did Sophia know, this moment of rediscovery was just the beginning. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with ups and downs, but it would lead her to a life more fulfilling than she could have ever imagined. As she cleaned her brushes, a small smile played on her lips, the first genuine smile in months. The journey of healing and self-discovery had begun, and Sophia was ready to embrace every step of it. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Alvarez?" his assistant's voice called. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Eduardo straightened his tie, his reflection in the glass staring back at him with hollow eyes. "Send them in," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority he'd worked so hard to cultivate. As he turned to greet his visitor, Eduardo couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had become his constant companion. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to do, expanded his business empire, become a titan of industry, amassed more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And yet, the victory felt hollow. Later that evening, Eduardo found himself in the back of his chauffeured car, mindlessly scrolling through emails on his phone. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, a kaleidoscope of lives being lived while he felt frozen in time. "Sir," his driver's voice crackled through the intercom. "There's heavy traffic ahead. Would you like me to take an alternate route?" Eduardo sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "No, it's fine. I could use some fresh air. Pull over at the next block. I'll walk the rest of the way. As he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cool evening air hit his face, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of his office and car. Eduardo loosened his tie, feeling oddly vulnerable without the armor of his usual entourage. He walked aimlessly, letting his feet carry him wherever they wished. The sounds of the city, laughter from a nearby restaurant, the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of passers-by washed over him. For the first time in years, Eduardo felt present in the moment, not thinking about the next deal or the next milestone. His wanderings led him to a small park, surprisingly serene despite its urban surroundings. As he approached a playground, the sound of children's laughter reached his ears. Eduardo paused, a bittersweet ache blooming in his chest. That's when he saw her, Sophia. She was sitting on a bench, her attention focused on two small children playing on the swings. Her hair was shorter now, and there was a piece about her that Eduardo didn't remember. But it was undeniably her. Eduardo's breath caught in his throat. He stood frozen, a maelstrom of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Regret, longing, and a painful awareness of what he'd thrown away 5 years ago crashed over him like a tidal wave. As if sensing his presence, Sophia looked up. Their eyes met across the playground, and for a moment, time stood still. Eduardo took a hesitant step forward, his heart pounding. What would he say? What could he say after all this time? But before he could move any closer, one of the children called out, "Mommy, look how high I can go." Sophia's attention immediately returned to the children, her face lighting up with a joy Eduardo had never seen before. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she called back, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. The realization hit Eduardo like a physical blow. Sophia had moved on. She had found the family she'd always wanted, the happiness that had eluded them in their marriage. And he was still chasing an empty dream. As Eduardo watched Sophia gather the children, showering them with affection, he felt a profound sense of loss. Not just for the life he could have had with Sophia, but for the man he could have been, the father he might have become if he hadn't been so blinded by ambition and the need for a biological heir. With a heavy heart, Eduardo turned away, melting back into the anonymity of the city streets. As he walked, his mind raced with questions and regrets. Had he made the biggest mistake of his life 5 years ago? Was it too late to make amends? And most importantly, could he find a way to fill the void in his life that all his success had failed to satisfy? Little did Eduardo know, this chance encounter was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, family, and love. The journey ahead would be difficult, forcing him to confront his past mistakes and reevaluate his priorities. But it would also offer a chance at redemption and the possibility of finding true fulfillment, if only he had the courage to seize it. The events of the previous evening played on a loop in her mind. Seeing Eduardo, after all this time, had stirred up emotions she thought she'd long since buried. She dipped her brush in a swirl of blue and began to paint, letting her feelings flow onto the canvas. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, not taking her eyes off her work. Claire entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, setting one down beside Sophia. "You're here early," Sophia sighed, putting down her brush. "I couldn't sleep. I saw Eduardo last night." Claire's eyes widened. "Eduardo? Your ex-husband? What happened?" Sophia turned to face her friend, her expression a mix of confusion and lingering pain. "Nothing, really. He was just there, at the park where I took the twins." Our eyes met for a moment and then, Claire prompted gently. "And then life went on," Sophia finished with a shrug. "The kids needed me, and he just faded back into the crowd." Claire studied Sophia's face carefully. "How do you feel about seeing him?" Sophia paused, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me felt that old pain, that anger, but mostly I felt pity." "Pity?" Claire echoed, surprised. Sophia nodded, turning back to her painting. "He looked empty." Successful, sure, but there was something missing in his eyes. The spark, the warmth. It was gone. As she spoke, Sophia's brush moved with renewed purpose, adding depth and shadow to the canvas before her. The image taking shape was one of a man standing alone in a crowd, surrounded by the trappings of success, but isolated from true connection. You know, Sophia continued, her voice soft, for years I thought I was the one who had lost everything. But now I realize I gained so much more than I ever could have imagined. She gestured to the photos pinned to her easel, images of the twins laughing, of her first art show, of the small family she had built for herself. Claire smiled, squeezing Sophia's shoulder. You've come so far, my dear. Your strength is truly inspiring. Sophia returned the smile, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. I hope I'm strong enough to face whatever comes next. Seeing Eduardo, it stirred up something. I can feel it. Change is coming, Claire. I'm just not sure what form it will take. As if on cue, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read the screen. What is it? Claire asked, noting the change in Sophia's expression. Sophia looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. It's from Eduardo. He wants to meet, to talk. The studio fell silent, the weight of possibility hanging in the air. Sophia stared at her phone, her mind racing with questions. What could Eduardo possibly want after all this time? Was she ready to face him, to confront the past she'd worked so hard to move beyond? As she contemplated her response, Sophia felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to protect the life and identity she'd built. But another part, a part she thought she'd left behind, whispered of unfinished business and the potential for closure. What are you going to do? Claire asked softly, breaking the silence. Sophia took a deep breath, her gaze moving from her phone to the painting before her, to the photos of her children, and finally back to Claire. I don't know, she admitted, but I think I need to find out what he wants. For my own peace of mind, if nothing else. As she typed out a tentative reply, agreeing to meet Eduardo for coffee, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The life she had carefully reconstructed over the past 5 years suddenly felt fragile, as if the foundations were shifting beneath her feet. Little did Sophia know, this decision to confront her past would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about forgiveness, second chances, and the true meaning of family. The journey ahead would be fraught with emotional landmines, unexpected allies, and the potential for both heartbreak and healing. But as she hit send on her reply, Sophia felt a surge of determination. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the strength and resilience she had cultivated over the years. The next chapter of her story was about to unfold, and this time, she was ready to write it on her own terms. Thank you for meeting me, Eduardo said, his voice softer than Sophia remembered. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth and stability. Why did you want to see me, Eduardo? He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to the table. Seeing you in the park, it made me realize how much has changed, how much I've missed. Sophia felt a twinge in her chest. Pain? Nostalgia? She couldn't quite name it. A lot has changed, she agreed cautiously. Eduardo looked up, his eyes searching her face. The children, they're beautiful. Are they? Adopted, Sophia finished for him. Twins, Marco and Lucia. Therefore, a flicker of emotion crossed Eduardo's face. Regret. Perhaps? I'm happy for you, Sophia. Truly. You seem content. Sophia couldn't help but smile, thinking of her children. They've brought so much joy into my life. But Eduardo, why are we here? What do you want? He leaned back, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Seeing you, it made me realize how empty my life has become. All the success, the money. It means nothing. Sophia felt a surge of conflicting emotions, sympathy warring with the lingering hurt of abandonment. Eduardo, I know, he cut in, holding up a hand. I know I have no right to come back into your life. But I needed to apologize. For everything. For being so blind, so selfish. The sincerity in his voice caught Sophia off guard. She studied him, trying to reconcile this vulnerable man with the cold, ambitious husband who had left her all those years ago. I appreciate that, she said slowly. But it doesn't change the past. It doesn't erase the pain. Eduardo nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. I know. I don't expect forgiveness, Sophia. I hoped maybe we could. Could what? Sophia prompted, her heart racing. Start over, Eduardo suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. Not as we were, but as friends, maybe? I'd like to know the person you've become. If you'll let me. Sophia sat back, stunned. Of all the scenarios she had imagined for this meeting, this wasn't one of them. She looked at Eduardo, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful Tycoon, but a man adrift, seeking connection. I don't know, Eduardo, she said honestly. That's a lot to process. He nodded, a sad smile playing at his lips. I understand. I know I'm asking for more than I deserve. But Sophia, seeing those children with you, it made me realize what truly matters in life. And I've spent the last 5 years chasing all the wrong things. As he spoke, Sophia felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to tremble. Not crumbling, not yet, but the first hints of cracks appearing. I need time, she said finally. This isn't just about me anymore. I have Marco and Lucia to think about. Of course, Eduardo agreed quickly. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, whenever, if ever you're ready. As they stood to leave, an awkward moment passed between them. In another life, they might have embraced or kissed cheeks. Now they stood uncertainly, the gulf of years and pain stretching between them. Thank you for listening, Eduardo said softly. And Sophia, you've built a beautiful life. I'm truly happy for you. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sophia standing outside the cafe, her mind whirling with possibilities and doubts. As she made her way home, Sophia's thoughts raced. Could she really let Eduardo back into her life, even as just a friend? What would it mean for her children, for the careful balance she'd struck? And more importantly, could she trust her own heart not to be swayed by the echoes of what they once shared? The sun was setting as Sophia reached her apartment building, casting long shadows across the street. As she climbed the stairs, she felt as though she was ascending into an unknown future, one where the past and present collided in ways she couldn't predict. Little did Sophia know, this unexpected reunion was just the beginning. The coming weeks would test her resolve, challenge her perceptions, and force her to confront long-buried feelings. As she unlocked her door, greeted by the joyful shouts of Marco and Lucia, Sophia took a deep breath. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the strength she'd cultivated over the years, and perhaps, just perhaps, with an open heart to the possibilities of forgiveness and new beginnings. One evening, as Sophia tucked Marco and Lucia into bed, she felt a sudden urge to hold them close, to protect them from the uncertainty that had crept back into her life. Mommy? Lucia's sleepy voice broke through Sophia's reverie. Why do you look sad? Sophia smiled softly, smoothing her daughter's curls. I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking. Marco propped himself up on one elbow, his eyes curious. About what? Sophia hesitated, unsure how to explain the complex emotions swirling within her. About an old friend. Someone I used to know a long time ago. Are they nice? Lucia asked, her eyes already drooping with sleep. The question gave Sophia pause. They're trying to be, she answered carefully. As she kissed her children goodnight and quietly closed their bedroom door, Sophia felt a weight settle on her shoulders. How could she even begin to explain Eduardo to them? How could she reconcile the man who had abandoned her with the contrite figure she'd met in the cafe? Lost in thought, Sophia made her way to her small home studio. She stood before her latest painting, a swirl of deep blues and purples, shot through with streaks of gold. It was chaotic, conflicted, much like her own emotions. The buzz of her phone startled her. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she saw Eduardo's name on the screen. With trembling fingers, She opened the message. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I'm in your neighborhood for a meeting. Would you like to grab a coffee? Sophia stared at the screen, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to protect the life she'd built. But another part, a part she'd thought long buried, whispered of unfinished business and the potential for closure. Before she could second-guess herself, Sophia typed out a reply. There's a park near my apartment. Meet me there in 30 minutes. As she grabbed her coat and keys, Sophia paused to look at the family photos lining the hallway. Her life now was so different from what she'd imagined all those years ago. Could she risk disrupting it? The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside, grounding her in the present moment. She walked briskly to the park, her heart pounding with each step. Eduardo was already there, sitting on a bench, looking smaller somehow without his usual business attire. When he saw Sophia approach, he stood, an uncertain smile on his face. "Thank you for meeting me," he said softly. Sophia nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "Why are you really here, Eduardo?" He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that caught her off guard. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last met, about the mistakes I've made, the priorities I've had wrong for so long." Sophia felt her defenses rising. "And what? You thought you could just walk back into my life and everything would be forgiven?" No, Eduardo said quickly, holding up his hands. "I know it's not that simple. I wanted to show you something." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, he unfolded it and held it out to Sophia. As she took it, her eyes widened in shock. It was a letter, formally resigning from his position as CEO of his company. "Eduardo, what is this?" Sophia whispered, looking up at him in disbelief. "A new start," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've realized that all the success, all the money in the world, means nothing if you don't have anyone to share it with. I've spent the last 5 years chasing the wrong dreams, Sophia. I want to make things right, not just with you, but with myself." Sophia felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The Eduardo she had known would never have given up his empire, his legacy. Yet here he was, offering it all up in a gesture that seemed both grand and utterly vulnerable. "I don't expect anything from you," Eduardo continued, his eyes pleading. "I just wanted you to know that I'm committed to changing, to being a better person. And if there's any chance, any at all, that we could start fresh as friends, nothing more, I'd be grateful for the opportunity." Sophia stood frozen, the letter clutched in her hand, her mind reeling. The man before her was so different from the one who had left her all those years ago. Could people really change that much? And more importantly, was she willing to take the risk of finding out? As the night breeze rustled through the trees, Sophia found herself at a crossroads. Her carefully reconstructed life hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of a decision that could change everything. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with potential heartache, but also the possibility of healing old wounds. Little did Sophia know, her response in this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about forgiveness, second chances, and the true meaning of family. As she opened her mouth to speak, the air around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way the winds of fate would blow. "Eduardo, I don't know what to say. It's a lot to process." He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "I understand. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just wanted you to know how serious I am about making changes in my life." Sophia handed the letter back to him, her hand trembling slightly. "What you're proposing, it's not just about us anymore. I have Marco and Lucia to think about. They're my world now." A flicker of pain crossed Eduardo's face, quickly replaced by understanding. "Of course, they should be your priority. I would never want to disrupt that." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken words and lingering questions. Sophia found herself studying Eduardo's face, searching for traces of the man she once knew. There was something different about him now, a softness around the edges, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said suddenly, surprising even herself. Eduardo nodded, Anything? Why now? After all these years? Why this sudden change? Eduardo's gaze drifted to the playground nearby, empty in the growing darkness. Seeing you in the park that day with the twins, it was like a veil had been lifted. I realized how empty my life had become, how all the success and money meant nothing without love, without family. His voice cracked on the last word, and Sophia felt an unexpected pang of empathy. She remembered all too well the pain of that realization. I've spent the last 5 years chasing ghosts, Sophia, Eduardo continued, his eyes meeting hers once more, trying to fill a void with more wealth, more power. But it was never enough. And then I saw you, truly saw you, for the first time in years. You were radiant, full of life and love. Everything I thought I wanted paled in comparison to what you've built for yourself. Sophia felt tears pricking at her eyes, overwhelmed by the raw honesty in Eduardo's words. It wasn't easy, she admitted. There were days I didn't think I'd make it. But you did, Eduardo said softly. You're so much stronger than I ever gave you credit for. And I'm sorry for that, Sophia. I'm sorry for so many things. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Sophia felt something shift inside her. The anger and resentment she'd carried for so long began to loosen its grip, making way for something else, not forgiveness. Not yet, but perhaps understanding. I can't promise anything, Sophia said finally. My life is complicated now, and the children come first. Always, Eduardo nodded eagerly. Of course, I wouldn't expect anything else. But, Sophia continued, choosing her words carefully, maybe we could start small. Coffee once in a while. See where it goes from there. The hope that bloomed on Eduardo's face was almost painful to witness. I'd like that, he said softly. Very much. As they stood there in the quiet park, the city humming around them, Sophia felt as though she was standing on the edge of something momentous. The future stretched out before her, full of uncertainty but also possibility. I should get back, Sophia said, glancing at her watch. The kids, Eduardo nodded, taking a step back. Of course. Thank you, Sophia, for listening, for giving me a chance. As Sophia turned to leave, she paused, looking back at Eduardo. This doesn't mean everything is forgiven, she said firmly. There's a lot of history between us, a lot of pain. I know, Eduardo replied, his voice thick with emotion. But it's a start. And that's more than I dared hope for. Sophia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. Good night, Eduardo. As she walked away, Sophia's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just set something in motion, something that had the potential to change everything. Back in her apartment, Sophia paused at the twins' bedroom door, listening to their soft breathing. Her heart swelled with love for them, and with it came a fierce protectiveness. Whatever happened next, she vowed, it would not come at the expense of their happiness. As she settled into bed that night, Sophia found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The painting in her studio, the one with swirls of blue and purple shot through with gold, suddenly made sense. It was chaos and hope, pain and possibility, all intertwined. Little did Sophia know, her decision to give Eduardo a chance, however small, would set in motion a series of events that would challenge her in ways she never expected. The journey ahead would be fraught with obstacles, unexpected allies, and moments of both heartbreak and joy. But as she drifted off to sleep, there was a glimmer of something in her heart that she hadn't felt in years, the tentative beginnings of hope for a future she'd never dared to imagine. One sunny afternoon, Sophia found herself in her studio, working on a commissioned piece when her phone buzzed with a message from Eduardo. I'm near your gallery. Would you like to meet for coffee? She hesitated, brush poised over canvas, torn between her work and the pull of curiosity. After a moment's deliberation, she replied, I'm actually at my studio. You can drop by if you'd like. 342 Maple Street, 3rd floor. As she waited for Eduardo's arrival, Sophia felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. This would be the first time he'd see her in her element. surrounded by her art and the life she'd built without him. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Eduardo standing there, looking slightly out of place in his casual attire, a far cry from the power suits he once wore like armor. "Hi," he said, a tentative smile on his face. "Thank you for letting me come by." Sophia nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Come in. I was just working on a piece." As Eduardo entered the studio, his eyes widened, taking in the vibrant canvases that covered the walls and the organized chaos of Sophia's workspace. "Sophia, this is incredible," he breathed, genuine awe in his voice. She felt a surge of pride, watching him absorb her world. "It's not much, but it's mine," she said softly. Eduardo turned to her, his eyes shining with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "It's everything," he said. "You've created something truly beautiful here." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years between them seemed to melt away. Sophia felt a familiar warmth in her chest, quickly followed by a pang of caution. She cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "So, what brings you to this part of town?" she asked, moving to her easel. Eduardo ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their early days together. "Actually, I wanted to tell you something. I've been doing some volunteer work at a local community center, teaching basic business skills to underprivileged youth." Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. "Really? That's unexpected," he chuckled softly. "I know, it's a far cry from boardrooms and million-dollar deals. But Sophia, it's the most fulfilling thing I've done in years." As Eduardo spoke about his experiences, Sophia found herself studying him. There was a light in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time, perhaps ever. The hard edges of ambition had softened, replaced by something warmer, more human. "I'm glad you found something meaningful," Sophia said sincerely. "It suits you." Eduardo's smile faltered slightly. I wish I had realized what truly mattered sooner. Before I lost everything that was really important." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with regret and unspoken possibilities. Sophia felt her carefully constructed walls begin to waver. "Eduardo," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we can't change the past. What's done is done." He nodded, taking a step closer to her. "I know. But Sophia, I can't help but wonder. Is there any chance for us to build something new? Not what we had before, but something different. Something better." Sophia's heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Part of her wanted to leap into the possibility, to believe in second chances and happy endings. But another part, the part that had protected her and her children for so long, held her back. "I don't know," she said honestly. "There's so much history between us, so much pain, and it's not just about us anymore. Marco and Lucia." "I understand," Eduardo said quickly. "They come first. Always. I would never want to disrupt their lives or cause them any confusion." As they stood there, surrounded by Sophia's art, representations of her journey, her pain, and her healing, she felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice. The future stretched out before her, full of unknowns and potential heartache, but also the possibility of something beautiful. "Maybe," Sophia said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "we could take things one day at a time. No promises, no expectations. Just see where this goes." The hope that bloomed on Eduardo's face was almost painful to witness. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Very much." As Eduardo prepared to leave, he paused at the door, turning back to Sophia. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me a chance. For letting me see the amazing person you've become." Sophia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "Goodbye, Eduardo." As the door closed behind him, Sophia turned back to her canvas, her mind whirling with thoughts and possibilities. She picked up her brush, dipping it in a warm golden hue. As she began to paint, she realized that the piece was evolving. Much like her own story, layers of pain and joy, past and present, all blending together to create something new and unexpectedly beautiful. Little did Sophia know, this moment of openness, This tentative step towards a new beginning would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and moments of doubt. But as she continued to paint, Sophia felt a glimmer of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope for a future she'd never dared to imagine, and the courage to embrace whatever lay ahead. "How are you holding up? Want to grab a coffee and talk?" Sophia smiled, grateful for her friend's intuition. "That would be great. Tomorrow morning at our usual spot." The next day, Sophia found herself sitting across from Claire in their favorite cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. "So," Claire began, her eyes searching Sophia's face, "how are things going with Eduardo?" Sophia sighed, wrapping her hands around her mug. "It's complicated. He's changed, Claire, in ways I never expected." Claire nodded, encouraging her to continue. "He's doing volunteer work, teaching business skills to underprivileged youth. And the way he talks about it, there's a passion there I've never seen before." Sophia paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Sometimes, when I look at him, I catch glimpses of the man I fell in love with all those years ago." Claire reached across the table, squeezing Sophia's hand. "And how do you feel about that?" Sophia's eyes welled with tears. "Scared, confused. Part of me wants to believe in second chances, in the possibility of something new. But another part is afraid of getting hurt again," Claire finished gently. Sophia nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "It's not just about me anymore. I have Marco and Lucia to think about. What if I let Eduardo in and he leaves again? I can't put them through that." Claire was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Sophia, you're one of the strongest people I know. You've built an incredible life for yourself and your children. But I have to ask, are you holding back because you're protecting them, or because you're protecting yourself?" The question hit Sophia like a physical blow. She sat back, her mind reeling. I don't know," she admitted. "Love is always a risk," Claire continued softly. "But sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all." As they continued to talk, Sophia felt something shift inside her. The walls she'd built around her heart began to tremble, not crumbling entirely, but allowing small cracks to form. Later that evening, as Sophia tucked Marco and Lucia into bed, she found herself studying their faces, searching for answers in their innocent expressions. "Mommy?" Lucia asked, her voice sleepy. "Why do you look sad?" Sophia smiled, smoothing her daughter's curls. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking." Marco propped himself up on one elbow. "About your friend? The one you've been meeting?" Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized the children had noticed her occasional outings with Eduardo. "Yes," she said carefully. "About him. Is he nice?" Lucia asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Sophia paused, considering her answer. "He's trying to be. He made some mistakes in the past, but he's working hard to be a better person." Marco nodded sagely, as if he understood the complexities of adult relationships. "Like when I broke your favorite vase and then helped you clean up and made you a card?" Sophia couldn't help but laugh, her heart swelling with love for her perceptive son. "Something like that, yes." As she kissed them goodnight and quietly closed their bedroom door, Sophia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The children's simple perspective had shed light on her own tangled emotions. She made her way to her studio, standing before her latest painting, a canvas swirling with warm golds and deep blues, intertwining in a complex dance. It was a visual representation of her journey, her struggles, and the possibility of something new emerging from the chaos. With trembling fingers, Sophia reached for her phone. She typed out a message to Eduardo. "Would you like to have dinner with me and the kids this weekend? Nothing fancy, just a casual meal at home. I think it's time you met them properly." Her finger hovered over the send button, her heart racing. This was more than just a dinner invitation. It was a step towards opening her heart, towards the possibility of a future she'd never dared to imagine. Taking a deep breath, Sophia pressed send. As the message whooshed away, she felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and moments of doubt. But for the first time in years, Sophia felt truly alive, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Little did she know, this simple dinner invitation would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. As she turned back to her painting, adding a streak of vibrant red to the swirling colors, Sophia felt a sense of anticipation building. The next chapter of her story was about to unfold, and this time, she was determined to write it on her own terms. As the clock ticked closer to Eduardo's arrival time, Sophia felt her nerves mounting. She smoothed her hair for the 100th time, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Mommy, you look pretty," Lucia chirped, hugging Sophia's legs. Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Thank you, sweetheart. Now, remember what we talked about? Eduardo is—" A knock at the door cut her off. The moment of truth had arrived. With a deep breath, Sophia opened the door to find Eduardo standing there, a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. His eyes met hers, a mixture of nervousness and hope evident in his gaze. "Hi," he said softly. "I hope these are okay." He handed her the flowers. Sophia's fingers brushed against his as she took them, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "They're beautiful, thank you." As Eduardo stepped inside, Marco and Lucia peeked out from behind the couch, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Eduardo," Sophia said, her voice slightly shaky, "I'd like you to meet Marco and Lucia." Eduardo knelt down, bringing himself to the children's eye level. "Hello there," he said warmly. "It's very nice to meet you both. I brought you something, if that's okay with your mom." He glanced up at Sophia, who nodded her approval. From the gift bag, Eduardo produced two small, beautifully wrapped packages. The children's faces lit up as they carefully opened them, revealing handcrafted wooden puzzles. "Wow!" Marco exclaimed, immediately starting to fiddle with the intricate pieces. "Thank you," Lucia said shyly, clutching her puzzle to her chest. As the evening progressed, Sophia found herself watching Eduardo interact with the twins. He listened intently to their stories, asked thoughtful questions, and even got down on the floor to help them with their new puzzles. It was a side of him she had never seen before, and it stirred something deep within her. During dinner, the conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Eduardo regaled the children with funny stories from his volunteer work, carefully edited for young ears. Sophia found herself laughing along, caught up in the warmth of the moment. As she cleared the plates, Eduardo insisted on helping. They stood side by side at the sink, a comfortable silence falling between them. "Thank you for this," Eduardo said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "For giving me a chance to be a part of your world, even if just for an evening." Sophia turned to look at him, really look at him. The man standing beside her was so different from the ambitious tycoon who had left her all those years ago. There was a softness in his eyes, a gentleness in his demeanor that she had never seen before. "Eduardo, she began, but was interrupted by a crash from the living room, followed by Lucia's cry. They rushed out to find Lucia on the floor, tears streaming down her face. She had tripped and fallen while chasing her brother. Without hesitation, Eduardo scooped her up, his voice soothing as he checked her for injuries. There, little one. You're okay. Let's see that knee, shall we?" Sophia watched, frozen, as Eduardo tenderly cleaned and bandaged Lucia's scraped knee, all the while distracting her with a silly story that soon had her giggling through her tears. In that moment, something shifted inside Sophia. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, not all at once, but brick by brick. As the evening came to a close and the children were tucked into bed, Sophia and Eduardo stood at the door, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. "I had a wonderful time," Eduardo said softly. "They're amazing kids, Sophia. You've done an incredible job." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As Eduardo turned to leave, he paused, looking back at her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Sophia, I know I have no right to ask for more than your friendship, but I want you to know, I'm committed to being a part of your life and the children's lives in whatever way you'll allow. I've learned what truly matters, and I won't make the same mistakes again." Sophia's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She found herself taking a step towards him, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. "Eduardo, she began, but the words caught in her throat. He smiled softly, understanding in his eyes. "It's okay. We have time. Good night, Sophia." As the door closed behind him, Sophia leaned against it, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had taken a huge step tonight, opening her home and her children's lives to Eduardo. And yet, instead of fear, she felt a glimmer of hope, of possibility. Little did Sophia know, this evening was just the beginning. The coming weeks would bring challenges she never expected, forcing her to confront her deepest fears and long-held beliefs about love and family. As she made her way to bed that night, her mind swirling with the events of the evening, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something life-changing. The journey ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face them head-on, her heart cautiously opening to the possibility of a love she never thought she'd find again. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as they all sat in the living room after a trip to the zoo, Sophia found herself watching Eduardo as he animatedly recounted a story about the penguins to the twins. His eyes sparkled with joy, and the sound of the children's laughter filled the room. Suddenly, Marco piped up, "Eduardo, are you going to be our new daddy?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sophia felt her heart stop, her eyes darting between Eduardo and the children. Eduardo's face softened as he looked at Marco. "That's a very big question, buddy," he said gently, "and it's not something I can decide on my own. Your mom and I are good friends, and I care about all of you very much. But being a daddy, that's a very special role that takes time and love to grow into." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat, touched by Eduardo's thoughtful response. She caught his eye, and the look they shared was filled with unspoken emotions. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Sophia and Eduardo stood on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below them. "I'm sorry about Marco's question," Sophia said softly. "I hope it didn't make you uncomfortable." Eduardo turned to her, his eyes intense. "Sophia, there's nothing to apologize for. The truth is, I've been thinking about it too. About us, about the future." Sophia's heart began to race. "Eduardo," he took her hand, his touch sending shivers up her arm. "I know we've been taking things slow, and I respect that. But Sophia, I need you to know, I'm all in. I love you, and I love those kids. I want to be a part of your lives, in whatever way you'll have me." Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes as the walls around her heart finally crumbled completely. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if it doesn't work out? What if we hurt the children?" Eduardo gently cupped her face, wiping away a stray tear with his thumb. "Life is full of risks, Sophia. But I believe that what we could have, is worth fighting for. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. I've learned what truly matters, and I promise you, I will never take you or the children for granted." Sophia looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity, the love, and the hope reflected there. In that moment, she made a decision. Slowly, she leaned in, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that was both achingly familiar and thrillingly new. It was a promise, a beginning, a leap of faith. As they pulled apart, both breathless, Sophia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "I love you too," she said softly, "and I'm ready to try, to build something new together." Eduardo's face broke into a radiant smile. He pulled her close, wrapping her in a warm embrace. As they stood there, the city humming below them, Sophia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, she was excited to face it. Just as the moment seemed perfect, Sophia's phone buzzed insistently. She reluctantly pulled away from Eduardo to check it, her brow furrowing as she read the message. "What is it?" Eduardo asked, concern evident in his voice. Sophia looked up, her face pale. "It's from my lawyer." Eduardo, your ex-wife is contesting the divorce settlement. She's claiming you hid assets, and she's demanding a new hearing. The air seemed to thicken around them as the implications of this news sank in. Eduardo's past was threatening to disrupt the delicate new life they were building. Sophia, I swear to you, I've been completely transparent. I don't know what she's talking about, Eduardo said, his voice tight with worry. Sophia nodded, wanting to believe him but feeling the first tendrils of doubt creep in. What does this mean for us? For the children? Eduardo took her hands in his gaze steady and determined. It means we face this together. I promise you, Sophia, I will do whatever it takes to protect what we're building here. No more running, no more hiding. We're a team now. As they stood there, the city lights blurring through Sophia's tear-filled eyes, she felt a mixture of fear and resolve. The path ahead was suddenly fraught with new challenges, but the love she felt for Eduardo, for her children, for the life they were creating, gave her strength. Little did they know, this unexpected twist was just the beginning of a storm that would test their newfound love, force them to confront painful truths, and ultimately redefine the meaning of family. As Sophia leaned into Eduardo's embrace, drawing comfort from his steady presence, she couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge was yet to come. The future hung in the balance, filled with both promise and peril, as they prepared to fight for the love they had rediscovered and the family they were building. One evening, as Sophia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of legal documents, Eduardo entered with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly, placing one mug in front of her. Sophia looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. I don't know, Eduardo. This is all so much. Your ex-wife's claims, the media attention, the way it's affecting the kids. I feel like I'm drowning. Eduardo sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I never meant for any of this to touch you or the children. If I had known. But you didn't know, Sophia interrupted, squeezing his hand. We can't change the past. I need to know that we can get through this, that it won't tear us apart. Eduardo's eyes met hers, filled with determination and love. We will get through this, Sophia. Together. I promise you. I'm not going anywhere. Just then, a small voice came from the doorway. Mommy? Eduardo, why are you sad? They turned to see Lucia standing there, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Sophia quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. We're not sad, sweetheart. We're just talking about grown-up things. Why aren't you in bed? Lucia patted over, climbing into Sophia's lap. I had a bad dream. Can I stay with you for a little bit? Sophia hugged her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. Of course, my love. Do you want to tell us about your dream? As Lucia recounted her nightmare, Eduardo listened intently, occasionally offering words of comfort. Sophia watched him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for the man he had become. Once Lucia had fallen asleep in Sophia's arms, Eduardo gently lifted her. I'll take her back to bed, he whispered. When he returned, he found Sophia standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his embrace. What are you thinking? He asked softly. Sophia took a deep breath. I'm thinking about how much has changed, how scared I am of losing all of this. Eduardo, if your ex-wife's claims are true, if there are hidden assets. Eduardo turned her to face him, his expression serious. Sophia, look at me. I swear to you I have been completely honest about my finances. I don't know what game my ex is playing, but I promise you, we will fight this together. Sophia searched his face, wanting desperately to believe him. Okay, she said finally. But Eduardo, no more secrets. If we're going to face this, I need to know everything. The good, the bad, all of it. Eduardo nodded solemnly. No more secrets. Promise. As they stood there, holding each other in the dim light of the kitchen, Sophia felt a mix of fear and hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but the love they shared gave her strength. Suddenly, Sophia's phone buzzed on the table. They both froze, the intrusion of reality harsh in the quiet moment. Sophia reluctantly pulled away to check the message. Her sharp intake of breath made Eduardo tense. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. Sophia looked up, her face pale. "It's from my lawyer. Eduardo, your ex-wife is claiming she has proof. Proof of offshore accounts, hidden assets. She's going public with it tomorrow." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of this news sank in. Eduardo's face drained of color, his eyes wide with shock and something else. "Fear? Eduardo!" Sophia's voice trembled. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me she's lying." The silence that followed was deafening. Eduardo opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his expression a mix of anguish and shame. In that moment, Sophia felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. The trust they had so carefully rebuilt, the future they had begun to plan, it all hung in the balance. Sophia, I can explain," Eduardo finally managed, reaching for her. But Sophia took a step back, her heart breaking all over again. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." As she turned away, tears streaming down her face, Sophia felt the weight of history repeating itself. The man she had come to love, the family they were building. It was all at risk of crumbling around her. Little did they know, this moment of crisis was just the beginning of a tumultuous journey that would test their love, their integrity, and their very definition of family. As the night deepened around them, Sophia and Eduardo stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, the gulf between them suddenly vast and treacherous. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges they never expected to face. But amidst the pain and confusion, a small spark of hope remained, a hope that love, honesty, and forgiveness might yet light the way forward. She sat on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands, when a soft knock came at her bedroom door. "Mom," Marco's voice was hesitant. "Are you okay? There are people outside with cameras." Sophia's heart sank. She had hoped to shield the children from this mess, but it seemed the world had other plans. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find both Marco and Lucia standing there, their eyes wide with worry. "Come here, my loves," she said, pulling them into a tight hug. "We need to talk." As she explained the situation in terms they could understand, Sophia felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. How had they ended up here again? Just as she finished talking to the children, her phone rang. It was Eduardo. "Sophia, please," his voice was desperate. "I need to explain. Can I come over?" She hesitated, torn between her desire for answers and her instinct to protect herself and her children. "I don't know, Eduardo. The press is outside. The kids are confused and scared." "I understand," he said softly. "But Sophia, I swear to you, things aren't what they seem. Please, give me a chance to explain everything." Against her better judgment, Sophia found herself agreeing. "Okay, but not here. Meet me at Claire's gallery in an hour. The kids will be safe there, away from the media circus." An hour later, Sophia stood in Claire's back office, the children happily distracted by art supplies in the main gallery. When Eduardo walked in, she was struck by how haggard he looked, as if he had aged years overnight. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice hoarse. Sophia nodded, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Explain." Eduardo took a deep breath. "The offshore accounts are real," he began, and Sophia felt her heart drop. But he continued, "But they're not what my ex-wife thinks they are. Sophia, those accounts were set up years ago, before our divorce, as part of a charitable foundation I was creating. I was going to surprise you with it back then. A way for us to give back, to make a difference." Sophia's mind reeled. But why keep it secret all this time? Why not disclose it during the divorce? Eduardo's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was a coward. After we split, I was so angry, so hurt. I buried myself in work, in making more money. I forgot about the foundation, about what really mattered. And when I started volunteering, when I met you again, I was ashamed. Ashamed of who I had been, of what I had neglected." As Eduardo spoke, Sophia felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at his deception, confusion at the complexity of the situation, and underneath it all, a flicker of hope that perhaps all was not lost. "I have all the documentation," Eduardo continued, pulling out a folder. "Everything to prove the legitimacy of the foundation. I've already contacted my lawyers. We're going public with the truth today." Sophia took the folder with shaking hands. As she leafed through the papers, seeing years of careful planning and genuine charitable intent, she felt the anger within her begin to soften. "Eduardo," she said quietly, "I believe you, but this doesn't erase the fact that you kept this from me, from us. How can I trust you after this?" Eduardo stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I know I've made mistakes, Sophia, terrible mistakes, but I swear to you, from this moment on, no more secrets, no more half-truths. I love you, and I love those kids. I want to build a life with you, a family, and that starts with complete honesty." As they stood there, the weight of the moment heavy between them, a commotion from the main gallery caught their attention. They rushed out to find Marco and Lucia surrounded by a group of reporters who had somehow gotten past Claire's security. Without hesitation, Eduardo stepped in front of the children, shielding them from the cameras. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm. "These children have nothing to do with this. If you want a story, you talk to me and my lawyers. But you leave this family out of it." Sophia watched, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and pride, as Eduardo deftly handled the press, ushering them out while protecting Marco and Lucia. Once the reporters were gone, Eduardo turned back to Sophia and the children. "I'm so sorry," he said, kneeling down to the kids' level. "I never meant for any of this to affect you." Lucia, with the innocence of a child, asked, "Does this mean you're not going to be our new daddy?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Sophia looked at Eduardo, seeing the love and determination in his eyes, and made a decision. "That," she said, taking Eduardo's hand, "is something we'll have to figure out together. As a family." As they stood there, the four of them together in the quiet of the gallery, Sophia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles to face, trust to rebuild, and a family to knit together. But in that moment, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Sophia knew that they could face anything, as long as they faced it together. Little did they know, this moment of unity was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. One filled with challenges, yes, but also with love, growth, and the unbreakable bonds of a family forged through adversity. As they left the gallery together, stepping out into the bright sunlight, Sophia felt a surge of hope for the future. A future they would build together, one day at a time. One crisp autumn evening, as the legal storm began to settle, Sophia stood in her studio, surrounded by canvases that told the story of their journey. Eduardo's voice broke through her reverie. "Sophia, can you come out here for a moment?" She stepped into the living room to find Eduardo on one knee, a small velvet box in his hand. Marco and Lucia stood nearby, barely containing their excitement. "Sophia," Eduardo began, his voice thick with emotion, "these past months have been the most challenging and beautiful of my life. We've faced trials I never imagined. But through it all, my love for you and these incredible children has only grown stronger." Sophia's heart raced as Eduardo continued, "I know we've talked about building a future together, about being a family, but I want to make it official. Sophia, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Marco and Lucia, and perhaps add to our family someday?" Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she looked from Eduardo to the children, their eyes shining with hope and love. In that moment, all the pain of the past, all the uncertainty of recent months, seemed to melt away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "Yes to all of it." As Eduardo slipped the ring onto her finger, Marco and Lucia rushed forward, enveloping them in a group hug. The room filled with laughter and joyful tears. Later that night, as the children slept and Sophia and Eduardo sat on the balcony, wrapped in a warm blanket, Sophia voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "Are you sure about this, Eduardo? About us, about adopting the kids?" "All of it." Eduardo turned to her, his eyes serious. "Sophia, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The past few months have shown me what truly matters. You, Marco, Lucia, you're my world now. Everything else is just details. Sophia leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. It won't be easy, you know. The press will have a field day with this, and there's still so much healing to do. I know, Eduardo said softly, but we'll face it together. As a family, as they sat there, looking out over the city lights, Sophia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. Suddenly, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Sophia gasped, pointing it out to Eduardo. "Make a wish," he whispered. Sophia closed her eyes, but found she didn't need to wish for anything. Everything she wanted was right here in this moment. As she opened her eyes, Eduardo's phone buzzed. He checked it, his brow furrowing slightly. "What is it?" Sophia asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. Eduardo hesitated for a moment before answering. It's from my ex-wife's lawyer. They want to meet, to discuss something about the foundation." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Just when everything seemed perfect, the past was threatening to intrude once again. "What do you think they want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Eduardo shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll handle it." Together, as they held each other close, the warm glow of their engagement giving way to the cool uncertainty of what lay ahead, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge was yet to come. Little did they know, this unexpected development would set in motion a series of events that would test their newfound family in ways they never imagined. The path ahead was fraught with obstacles, but also with opportunities for growth, forgiveness, and the deepening of their love. As the night deepened around them, Sophia and Eduardo stood on the precipice of a new chapter in their lives. The future was uncertain, but they faced it with hope, determination, and the unshakable bond of a family forged through adversity. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together, their love a beacon guiding them through the darkness toward a brighter tomorrow. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" she asked Eduardo, who was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and apprehension. "I appreciate the offer, love, but I think it's best if I face this alone. Whatever Victoria's lawyer has to say, I need to hear it first." Sophia nodded, understanding but still uneasy. She walked over to him, straightening his already perfect tie. "Just remember that we're in this together. Whatever happens in that meeting, we'll face it as a family." Eduardo pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I know. You and the kids are my strength now. I won't forget that." As Eduardo left, Sophia felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. She busied herself with getting Marco and Lucia ready for school, trying to keep her worry from showing. Hours passed, feeling like an eternity. Sophia alternated between pacing her studio and staring at her phone, willing it to ring. When it finally did, her heart leapt into her throat. "Eduardo," she answered breathlessly. His voice came through, sounding strained. "Sophia, can you meet me at the park? The one near the gallery. I need to talk to you in person." The walk to the park was a blur. Sophia's mind raced with possibilities, each scenario worse than the last. When she spotted Eduardo sitting on a bench, his head in his hands, her heart sank. "Eduardo," she called softly, approaching him. He looked up, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Sophia, I don't know how to say this." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Remember?" Eduardo took a deep breath. "Victoria, she's pregnant. And she claims it's mine." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sophia felt as though all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "What? How is that possible?" Eduardo's voice was barely above a whisper. "Remember that business trip I took, just before we reconnected? Victoria says we had a moment of weakness. One last night together before finalizing the divorce." Sophia pulled her hand away, feeling as though she'd been slapped. "And did you have that moment of weakness?" Eduardo's silence was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with shame. I don't know. I was in a dark place then, drinking too much. There are parts of that night I don't remember clearly. Tears streamed down Sophia's face as the implications of this revelation sank in. So what now? What does this mean for us? For our family? Eduardo reached for her hand, but Sophia pulled away. Sophia, please. I love you. I love our family. This doesn't change that, doesn't it? Sophia stood, her voice trembling. You're telling me your ex-wife is pregnant with your child. How can that not change everything? As they stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on them, a small voice cut through the tension. Mommy? Eduardo? They turned to see Marco and Lucia standing a few feet away, having just been dropped off by Claire after school. The children's eyes were wide with confusion and concern. Sophia quickly wiped her tears, forcing a smile. Hi, sweethearts. What are you doing here? Lucia stepped forward, her little face scrunched with worry. Aunt Claire said we should surprise you here. Are you and Eduardo fighting? The innocence of the question cut through Sophia's pain. She looked at Eduardo, seeing the anguish and love in his eyes, then back at the children, their children. In that moment, Sophia made a decision. She knelt down, opening her arms to Marco and Lucia. No, darlings, we're not fighting. We just got some surprising news, and we're trying to figure out what it means for our family. Eduardo knelt beside her, his voice soft but steady. But no matter what, we want you to know that we love you, both of you, and nothing will ever change that. As they embraced, the four of them huddled together in the park. Sophia felt a mix of emotions she couldn't begin to untangle. Fear, anger, love, hope, all swirled together in a storm of uncertainty. Little did they know, this moment of crisis was just the beginning of a journey that would test the very foundations of their newly formed family. The path ahead was fraught with legal battles, emotional turmoil, and difficult choices. But as they held each other close, surrounded by the fading light of the day, there was also a glimmer of something else, a resilience born of love, a determination to fight for the family they had built. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges they never expected to face. But as Sophia looked into Eduardo's eyes, then at the faces of Marco and Lucia, she felt a spark of hope. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together, their love a beacon guiding them through the darkness toward a future they would forge with their own hands. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table after putting Marco and Lucia to bed, Sophia finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at her. Eduardo, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, what do you want? If this baby is yours, what does that mean for us? Eduardo reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His eyes were filled with a mixture of love and torment. Sophia, I want you. I want our family. But if this child is mine, I can't abandon it. I won't be the kind of father who walks away. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes. And what about Marco and Lucia? What about the life we've been building? They're my children too, Eduardo said firmly. In every way that matters. Nothing will ever change that. Just then, a small voice came from the doorway. Mommy? Eduardo, are you talking about the new baby? They turned to see Lucia standing there, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Sophia's heart clenched, realizing their daughter had overheard their conversation. Come here, sweetheart, Sophia said, opening her arms. Lucia climbed into her lap, and Eduardo moved his chair closer, enveloping them both in a hug. Yes, we were talking about the baby, Eduardo said gently. It's a complicated situation, but we want you to know that no matter what happens, we love you and Marco more than anything in the world. Lucia looked up at them, her eyes wide. If the baby is Eduardo's, does that mean it will be our brother or sister? Sophia and Eduardo exchanged a glance, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice filled with emotion. That's something we're still figuring out, honey. But what we do know is that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, and we have plenty of that. As they sat there, holding each other close, a knock at the door startled them. Eduardo went to answer it, his face paling as he saw who was on the other side. "Victoria," he said, his voice strained. "What are you doing here?" Sofia stood, instinctively pulling Lucia closer as Victoria stepped into the apartment. The tension in the room was palpable. "I'm sorry to intrude," Victoria said, her hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. "But I couldn't wait any longer. We need to talk about this situation. All of us." Sofia felt her heart racing as she looked between Eduardo and Victoria. This was the moment she had been dreading, the collision of past and present, of old wounds and new hopes. "Lucia, sweetheart," she said softly, "why don't you go to your room for a bit? The grown-ups need to talk." As Lucia reluctantly left, Sofia turned to face Victoria and Eduardo. The air crackled with unspoken emotions and the weight of decisions yet to be made. "All right," Sofia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's talk." What followed was a conversation that would shape the course of all their lives. Victoria revealed that she had been struggling with the decision to keep the baby, torn between her career ambitions and the unexpected joy of impending motherhood. Eduardo grappled with his feelings of responsibility and the fear of losing the family he had built with Sofia. And Sofia found herself facing a choice she never thought she'd have to make. As the night wore on, tears were shed, voices were raised, and hearts were laid bare. But amidst the pain and confusion, something unexpected began to emerge. A fragile understanding, a glimmer of possibility. "I don't want to tear your family apart," Victoria said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't do this alone." Sofia looked at Eduardo, seeing the conflict in his eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. Maybe you don't have to." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eduardo's eyes widened in surprise, and Victoria looked at Sofia with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "What are you saying?" Eduardo asked softly. Sofia took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I'm saying maybe there's a way for all of us to be a family. Not in the traditional sense, but in our own way. It won't be easy, but if we're all willing to try." As the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows, the three adults sat in stunned silence, the possibility of an unconventional but loving family taking shape before them. Little did they know, this moment of openness and vulnerability was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge societal norms, test the limits of their love, and redefine the very meaning of family. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential pitfalls and moments of doubt. But as they looked at each other in the soft morning light, there was also a sense of hope, a belief that with love, understanding, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected, they could create something beautiful and unique. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges and possibilities. As Sofia, Eduardo, and Victoria began to tentatively discuss the logistics of their new arrangement, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the brink of something revolutionary. A new kind of family, born of love, forgiveness, and the courage to follow their hearts. One sunny afternoon, Sofia found herself in the nursery they had set up in the spare room of her and Eduardo's apartment. She ran her hand over the soft fabric of the crib bedding, a swirl of emotions coursing through her. "Sofia?" Eduardo's voice came from the doorway. "Are you okay?" She turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't know. It's all so overwhelming sometimes. Are we really doing this? Can we make it work?" Eduardo crossed the room, wrapping her in his arms. "We're doing it, my love. One day at a time. And yes, we can make it work. We already are." Just then, they heard the front door open and Victoria's voice calling out, "Hello? We're here for the ultrasound viewing." Sofia and Eduardo made their way to the living room, where Victoria was setting up her laptop. Marco and Lucia bounced excitedly on the couch, eager to see images of their soon-to-be sibling. As they all gathered around the screen, the grainy black and white image appeared. The room fell silent as they watched the tiny form move and shift. "Oh," Victoria breathed, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "It's so real now." Sofia found herself reaching out, placing her hand next to Victoria's. The two women's eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. "Do you want to know the gender?" Victoria asked, looking around at the faces surrounding her. Marco piped up, "Yes, I want a brother." "No, a sister," Lucia countered. Eduardo chuckled, squeezing Sophia's hand. "What do you think, love?" Sophia took a deep breath, surprised by the surge of emotion she felt. "Yes," she said softly. "Let's find out." Victoria nodded to the ultrasound technician on the screen, who smiled and said, "Congratulations, it's a girl." The room erupted in a mixture of cheers and happy tears. As Sophia looked around at the faces of her expanded family, Eduardo beaming with pride, Victoria glowing with maternal joy, Marco and Lucia arguing good-naturedly about names, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the conversation turned to the future. "We should discuss living arrangements," Eduardo said, his tone careful. "The baby,